He leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper, meant for her ears alone, but loud enough for the entire table to hear. "You know, Clara," he said, a smug grin playing on his lips as he looked at his glowing bride. "I'm glad you came. It's good for you to see what real success looks like." He gestured around the opulent ballroom, filled with New York's elite. "Some people are destined for greatness, and well, some are just a stepping stone." He then turned to his new wife's father, a powerful senator, and declared, "Honestly, looking back, Clara was a nobody, a sweet little placeholder before my real life began." The laughter at the table felt like a physical blow, but what happened next wasn't just a comeback. It was a fairy tale rewriting of history that would leave them all speechless. The invitation had felt like a shard of glass in the mail. A thick, cream-colored cardstock embossed with the gold leaf initials B and P. Brendan Holloway and Penelope Davies. Clara Abernathy had stared at it for a full 10 minutes, her coffee growing cold on the granite countertop of the small apartment she'd moved into after the divorce. Her name, Ms. Clara Abernathy, was written in elegant calligraphy, a cruel courtesy. Why invite her? Was it a power play? A final public twist of the knife. Her best friend Sophia had been unequivocal. "You burn it," she'd commanded over the phone. "You burn it, then you take the ashes, mix them into a margarita, and toast to your freedom. Do not go, Clara. That man is a black hole of narcissism." Clara had laughed, but the advice didn't stick. A small, treacherous part of her needed to go. She needed to see it with her own eyes to fully sever the cord of the 10 years they had spent together. 5, dating 5, married. 10 years where she had put her own ambitions on hold. Her doctorate in Renaissance art history had been indefinitely postponed. Her promising career as a museum curator had been downsized to freelance archival work she could do from home, all to support Brendan's burgeoning tech empire. She had managed his schedule, hosted his investors, charmed his rivals, and edited his speeches. She had been the silent, steady scaffolding upon which he built his skyscraper of success. And when he'd reached the penthouse, he decided he wanted a new view. He'd left her for Penelope Davies, the daughter of a political dynasty whose social connections could open doors even Brendan's money couldn't. The divorce had been swift and brutal. He called her unambitious. He said she lacked the drive for the world he now lived in. He made her feel small, provincial, like a dusty relic he was clearing out of his new gleaming life. So she went to the wedding. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress, understated, but expensive enough not to look pitiful. She held her head high as she walked into the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, a place where she and Brendan had once celebrated an anniversary. The air was thick with the scent of thousands of white roses and the low hum of immense wealth. She found her assigned table in a respectable yet pointedly distant corner. It was filled with a few old mutual friends from their university days, people who offered her sympathetic smiles that felt more like pity. From her seat, she had a perfect view of the head table. Brendan was incandescently happy, his arm draped possessively around Penelope, who was a vision in a couture gown that probably cost more than Clara's entire apartment. They looked like a power couple on the cover of a magazine, polished, perfect, and utterly ruthless. The speeches were a masterclass in sycophancy. People lauded Brendan's genius, his vision, his relentless ambition. No one mentioned the woman who had spent a decade fueling that ambition. It was as if she had been erased from his history. Clara picked at her sea bass, the food tasting like ash in her mouth. She felt like a ghost at the feast. The moment came after the cake was cut. Brendan flushed with champagne, and adulation began making his rounds. When he arrived at her table, a hush fell over their small group. He greeted his old friends with backslapping bonhomie before his eyes landed on her. "Clara," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "I'm surprised you came. You invited me, Brendan, she replied, her voice impressively steady. A courtesy, of course. He chuckled. He leaned in, and that's when he delivered the lines that would echo in her mind for months. The whisper about her being a stepping stone, a placeholder, a nobody. He didn't just say it to her. He said it for the benefit of his new father-in-law, Senator Davies, who was standing beside him. The senator gave a dismissive smirk, looking Clara up and down, as if she were a piece of lint on his son-in-law's perfect suit. The old friends at the table shifted uncomfortably, staring down at their plates. No one defended her. In Brendan's world, loyalty was currency, and Clara was bankrupt. The laughter, led by Brendan himself, was the final straw. It wasn't loud or boisterous, but a low, confident chuckle of shared superiority. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on her, past her worth her dignity. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She didn't trust herself to speak. The carefully constructed wall of composure she had built around herself crumbled into dust. She stood up her chair, scraping against the marble floor. Her hands were shaking. "If you'll excuse me," she murmured, her voice a thread. She didn't look at Brendan again. She turned and walked, not ran out of the ballroom. She kept her back straight, her steps measured, even as tears began to blur the glittering chandeliers into streaks of blinding light. Each step was an agony of humiliation. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her back, could hear the whispers already starting. Once she was in the lobby, the dam broke. She ducked into a deserted hallway, pressing her back against the cold wall, as silent, hot tears streamed down her face. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had tried to break her spirit. He had publicly branded her as worthless a footnote in the grand story of his life. In that moment, in the gilded hallway of a five-star hotel, Clara Abernathy felt like less than a nobody. She felt invisible. She vowed then and there that she would never ever let anyone make her feel that way again. The first step was to get as far away from Brendan Holloway's world as she possibly could. The 6 months that followed the wedding were a study in grey. Clara threw herself into her work with a ferocity that bordered on obsession, not for ambition, but for survival. It was the only thing that kept the memory of Brendan's voice at bay. She took on any freelance project she could find, cataloguing private collections for insurance purposes, writing dry academic descriptions for auction houses, authenticating minor works for estates. It was solitary, meticulous work that occupied her hands and her mind. Her small apartment, once a symbol of her reduced circumstances, became her sanctuary. It was filled with books on art history, reproductions of Renaissance masterpieces, and the faint smell of archival paper and linseed oil. It was her world, a world Brendan had never understood or valued. He'd once walked into her home office, looked at a priceless 16th century manuscript she was studying, and asked if it was worth a lot. He didn't see the history, the artistry, or the soul within the vellum pages. He only saw a price tag. Sophia remained her anchor. She'd show up unannounced with takeout and wine, refusing to let Clara disappear completely into her cocoon of grief and work. "You need a project, a real one," Sophia said one evening, gesturing at the stacks of paperwork on Clara's dining table. "Something that lights you up, something that reminds you that you are Clara Abernathy, the woman who could spot a forgery from 20 paces and who wrote the most brilliant dissertation proposal on Donatello's lost works that our entire department had ever seen." "That woman doesn't exist anymore," Clara said flatly, sorting through photographs of Rococo furniture. "Bull," Sophia retorted. "She's just buried under 10 years of a soul-crushing marriage. We need to excavate her." The excavation began with an unexpected email. It came from a Dr. Alleman, the curator of a private foundation based in Geneva. The email was formal and intriguing. The foundation had recently acquired a collection of items from a defunct Italian monastery, including a severely damaged 15th century Book of Hours. The manuscript was believed to be from the workshop of a Florentine master, but its water and smoke damage was so extensive that most institutions had deemed its restoration impossible. De Allemande had come across a paper Clara had published in a niche art journal 5 years prior on innovative techniques for restoring fire-damaged pigments. Your methodology, Ms. Abernathy, he wrote, while unconventional, is precisely the kind of bold approach this project requires. The Foundation would be honored if you would consider taking on the commission as the lead restorer. The work would take place in our private restoration studio in Florence, Italy. All expenses, plus a generous stipend, would be provided. We anticipate the project will take approximately 1 year. Florence, the heart of the Renaissance. The city she had dreamed of living in since she was a girl. It felt less like a job offer, and more like a lifeline thrown from another world. Doubt gnawed at her. Could she do it? It had been years since she'd worked on a project of this magnitude. Her confidence was a fragile, shattered thing. She read the email a dozen times, her heart pounding. The thought of leaving New York, of putting an ocean between herself and Brendan's suffocating influence, was intoxicating. She called Sophia, her voice trembling. I think I'm going to Florence." Sophia's shriek of joy was so loud, Clara had to pull the phone away from her ear. "It's a sign, Clara. It's the universe telling you to go be brilliant. Say yes. Say yes right now before you talk yourself out of it." Clara did. She typed her acceptance with shaking fingers, a spark of the old passionate art historian flickering back to life inside her. 2 months later, she had packed up her life, put her belongings in storage, and boarded a plane to Italy. The restoration studio was not what she expected. It wasn't a sterile modern facility. It was located in a centuries-old palazzo on a quiet street near the Oltrarno, the artisan quarter of Florence. The studio itself occupied the top floor with massive arched windows that flooded the room with the famed Tuscan light. It smelled of old wood turpentine and history. Dr. Allemande was a kind, elderly Swiss man who treated the damaged manuscript with the reverence of a holy relic. He introduced her to the small team of junior conservators and then left her to her work, trusting her completely. The manuscript was in even worse condition than she had imagined. Its leather cover was charred, the vellum pages were fused together by water and heat, and the once vibrant illuminations were obscured by a layer of grime and soot. It was a Herculean task. For the first few weeks, Clara felt overwhelmed, but then she found her rhythm. She lost herself in the painstaking process. The world shrank to the tip of her scalpel, the delicate brush she used to clear away debris, the chemical formulas she mixed to stabilize the fragile ink. She worked from dawn until dusk, fueled by espresso and a renewed sense of purpose. Slowly, painstakingly, the book began to reveal its secrets. Beneath the grime, she uncovered breathtaking images, saints draped in robes of lapis lazuli, intricate borders of gold leaf and crushed berries, tiny detailed landscapes in the margins. It wasn't just a book, it was a masterpiece. Every restored page felt like a personal victory, a reclamation of her own identity. She was no longer Brendan Holloway's discarded wife. She was Clara Abernathy, a restorer of lost beauty. She explored Florence on her days off, wandering through the Uffizi Gallery and the Bargello Museum, feeling like she was among old friends. She learned to order coffee in Italian, found a favorite trattoria where the owner knew her by name, and let the warmth of the Italian sun melt away the last of the New York chill. One afternoon, about 4 months into her work, she was hunched over a particularly difficult page, trying to analyze the chemical composition of a faded green pigment. The studio was quiet, except for the hum of the dehumidifier. "That's an unusual copper resonate," a deep, accented voice said from behind her. "Most workshops of that era would have used malachite." Clara jumped, startled. She turned to see a man standing in the doorway of the studio. He was tall and dressed in a simple but well-tailored linen shirt and trousers, no suit, no tie. He had thoughtful, dark eyes and a quiet air of authority. She had never seen him before. "I'm sorry I didn't mean to startle you." He said his English perfect, but with a cadence she couldn't quite place. "Dr. Alamond allowed me to come up. I'm a patron of the foundation." "Oh," Clara said, feeling a bit flustered. "I'm Clara Abernathy." "I know." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face. "I've been following the reports on your progress. It's miraculous work. My name is Alex. Just Alex." He walked closer, his eyes fixed on the manuscript. He didn't ask what it was worth. He asked about the artist's technique, the story depicted in the illumination, the reason for the unusual pigment choice. His questions were insightful, born of a genuine and deep knowledge of the subject. For the first time in years, Clara found herself in a conversation with a man who spoke her language, the language of art history and passion. They talked for over an hour, their heads bent over the ancient book. He listened with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she hadn't felt in a very long time. There was a calmness about him, a lack of pretense that was the complete antithesis of Brendan's brash arrogance. When he finally left, promising to check in on her progress again soon, Clara realized she was smiling a real, unforced smile. The grey that had clouded her world for so long was finally beginning to break, letting in the warm, golden light of the Tuscan sun. Alex became a regular visitor to the studio. He would appear once or twice a week, always unannounced, always with a coffee for her and a quiet, respectful curiosity about her work. He never stayed too long, but his visits became the highlight of Clara's week. Their conversations flowed easily from the chemical composition of 15th century gesso to the political intrigues of the Medici family to their shared love for the quiet, hidden corners of Florence. He told her he was in the family business, a vague term that she interpreted as old European money. He was well-traveled, speaking several languages fluently, and possessed a formal sort of grace that seemed slightly out of place in the modern world. But with her, he was just Alex. He was funny, self-deprecating, and had a surprisingly encyclopedic knowledge of Renaissance military history, which he claimed was a boyhood obsession. He drew her out of her shell. He encouraged her to talk about her own research, her postponed doctorate, her theories on Donatello. He listened with rapt attention, his dark eyes never leaving her face, making her feel like her ideas were the most fascinating things in the world. He was, she realized with a jolt, one day, the first person who had ever made her feel that her mind was her most attractive quality. One Friday, as she was finishing for the day, he appeared in the doorway. "Enough with these dusty pages," he said with a smile. "I'm kidnapping you for dinner. There's a place in the hills above the city. You need to see the sunset from there." Clara hesitated for only a second before agreeing. That evening, as they sat on a terrace overlooking the glittering panorama of Florence, the Duomo, a majestic silhouette against a sky painted in shades of orange and violet, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. "You seem different here," Alex observed, swirling the wine in his glass. "From the person Dr. Alamond described in the initial file." Clara took a deep breath, the Chianti giving her a sliver of courage. "The person in that file was coming out of a difficult time. I was married for 5 years, to a man who didn't appreciate dusty pages." She found herself telling him about Brendan, not in a torrent of anger, but in a quiet, matter-of-fact way. She spoke of the gradual erosion of her confidence of feeling like an accessory rather than a partner. She didn't mention the final humiliating scene at the wedding. It was still too raw. Alex listened without interruption, his expression unreadable but intense. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "He sounds," Alex said finally, his voice carefully neutral, "like a man who is terrified of anything he cannot purchase or control. Your passion for your work is something authentic. He couldn't own it, so he tried to diminish it." His simple, insightful summary lanced the wound more cleanly than any of Sophia's furious tirades had. He understood. He saw it not as her failure, but as Brendan's. Their relationship deepened over the following weeks. Dinners turned into long walks along the Arno, and conversations in the studio became more personal. There was an undeniable chemistry between them, an intellectual and emotional spark that grew brighter with each meeting. Yet Alex remained somewhat of a mystery. He never spoke much about his family, and when she asked about his business, he would deflect with a charming joke. Clara didn't press. She was enjoying the present too much to worry about the details of his past. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday. Clara had made a major breakthrough successfully, separating two vellum pages that had been fused together for centuries, revealing a stunning, perfectly preserved full-page illumination. She was ecstatic and wanted to share the news with Alex. Remembering he had mentioned an interest in modern sculpture, she decided to surprise him. She knew he occasionally visited a small exclusive gallery near the Ponte Vecchio. She found the gallery easily. As she pushed open the heavy glass door, she saw him immediately. He was standing in the center of the room with two other men, both impeccably dressed in dark suits. But it wasn't the men that made her stop in her tracks. It was the way they were deferred to him. It was the palpable aura of importance that surrounded him, something she had been oblivious to in the quiet intimacy of her studio. As she watched from the doorway, a well-dressed woman walked by speaking into her phone in rapid Italian. Yes, Prince Alistair is here himself. Unbelievable. He almost never makes public appearances. Prince Alistair. The name echoed in the sudden silence of Clara's mind. Her blood ran cold. She backed out of the doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stumbled down the street in a daze, the rain soaking her hair. Prince Alistair. It couldn't be. She rushed back to her apartment, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit the key in the lock. She flew to her laptop and typed Prince Alistair into the search bar. The screen filled with images of him standing on a palace balcony next to an elegant, regal-looking woman, him shaking hands with world leaders, him in full military dress uniform. The articles identified him as His Serene Highness Prince Alistair Leopold of Eldoria, the heir apparent to the small, wealthy European principality nestled between Switzerland and Austria. Eldoria was known for its banking privacy, its political neutrality, and its royal family's immense, centuries-old private art collection. The foundation she was working for was their primary philanthropic entity. Alex wasn't just a patron. He was the foundation. She felt a wave of nausea. He had lied to her, or rather, he had omitted the single most important detail about his life. She felt foolish, naive, a prince. What was she, a struggling art restorer, doing getting involved with a prince? It was a fairy tale, and she was a woman who no longer believed in them. All her insecurities came rushing back. Was she just a curiosity to him? A temporary diversion? A commoner he was slumming it with before returning to his world of palaces and princesses? The anger was quickly followed by a deep, aching sadness. The connection she had felt with him, which had seemed so real and genuine, now felt tainted by the enormous secret he had kept. He must have sensed her retreat. He called her that evening, his voice laced with concern. Clara, is everything all right? You seem distant. You should have told me, she said, her voice small and tight. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You went to the gallery, he stated. It wasn't a question. Yes. Clara, can I see you? He asked, his voice low and urgent. Please, let me explain. He came to her apartment 20 minutes later. He looked different, stripped of the princely context. He was just Alex, looking worried and standing awkwardly in her book-cluttered living room. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, wrapping her arms around herself. When I first met you, I wanted you to see me, not the title, he said earnestly, taking a step closer. My entire life, people have treated me differently because of it. They are either sycophants or they are hostile. With you in the studio, It was the first time in a very long time I felt like I was just a man talking to a woman I was intensely interested in. I was selfish. I wanted to keep that feeling for as long as I could. So I was an experiment, an escape. No, he said, his voice firm. You are a revelation. You are the most intelligent, passionate, and resilient person I have ever met. Everything I feel for you is real, Clara. The title, the duties, the palace. That's my circumstance. It's not who I am. Alex is closer to who I am than Prince Alistair has ever been. He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. I know this is a shock, and I'm so sorry for not being honest sooner. But please don't let my name change what we've found. Clara looked at him, the man who discussed pigments and brushstrokes with her, who brought her coffee, who made her laugh. And she looked at the photos on her laptop screen of the prince in the gilded cage. It was a dizzying, impossible choice. Her head screamed at her to run to protect her newly healed heart from what was sure to be a world of pain and complexity. But her heart, which had been dormant for so long, whispered that this man, prince or not, was worth the risk. I don't know how to do this, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to be with a prince. Alistair closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. They were warm and steady. You don't have to be with a prince, he said softly. Just be with me. We'll figure out the rest together. Dating a prince, Clara quickly learned, was less about fairy tale romance and more about navigating a minefield of protocol press and public expectation. The transition from the quiet anonymity of Florence to the scrutinized world of Eldoria's royal court was jarring. Alistair was true to his word. He did everything he could to shield her. Their relationship was kept intensely private for the first few months. They met in secluded villas owned by the royal family in the Swiss Alps or on the French Riviera, places where they could be Alex and Clara. In those stolen weeks, their bond deepened into a profound love. He was her staunchest supporter, encouraging her to formally re-enroll in her doctoral program, offering her access to the Eldorian Royal Archives, which contained countless unstudied Renaissance documents. For the first time, Clara felt like she was part of a true partnership, where her ambitions were not just tolerated, but celebrated. But the secret couldn't last. A paparazzo with a long lens caught them sharing a coffee on a hotel balcony in Geneva. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. The next day, the headline was global: Mystery Woman and the Reclusive Prince, who is Alistair's American love. The floodgates opened. Reporters dug into her past. They uncovered her modest upbringing, her abandoned academic career, and inevitably her marriage to and divorce from Brendan Holloway. She was painted as a commoner, a divorcee, an unlikely companion for the blue-blooded prince. Brendan, of course, was contacted by every tabloid on the planet. To her surprise, he declined to comment publicly, but his silence was loud. Through mutual acquaintances, Clara heard the narrative he was spinning privately, that she was an ambitious social climber who had likely targeted the prince, that he had let her go because she wasn't content once with a normal life. It was a lie designed to protect his own ego, recasting her as a calculating gold digger rather than the woman he had discarded. The true test came when Alistair formally introduced her to his mother, Queen Beatrix of Eldoria. The Queen was a formidable woman in her 70s, with piercing blue eyes and an air of unshakable authority. They met for tea in a lavishly appointed drawing room in the royal palace of Eldenburg. The room was cold, filled with priceless antiques and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Queen Beatrix was polite, but her questions were surgical. She inquired about Clara's family, her education, her previous marital arrangement. Every question was designed to highlight the immense gulf between Clara's world and theirs. Our world, Ms. Abernathy, values tradition and discretion above all. The Queen stated, her voice as crisp as starched linen. Alistair's life is not his own. It belongs to this country. His wife must be prepared for a life of duty sacrifice and unrelenting public scrutiny. It is not a role for the faint of heart, or for one seeking personal fulfillment. It was a clear warning. Clara felt a flicker of the old insecurity, the fear of not being good enough. But then she looked at Alistair, who was watching her with unwavering support. She thought of the woman she had become in Florence, confident, passionate, and unwilling to be diminished. "Your Majesty," Clara began, her voice calm and respectful, "I fell in love with your son, the man, not the prince. I understand the responsibilities that come with his position, and I do not take them lightly, but I believe a life of duty does not have to be a life devoid of personal passion. Perhaps what this country needs isn't just a princess who can wave from a balcony, but one who can also contribute something of substance. My field is history, the preservation of culture. That is the bedrock upon which Eldoria itself is built. I believe I can serve this country well, not by erasing who I am, but by embracing it." There was a long, tense silence. Queen Beatrix studied Clara for what felt like an eternity, her gaze unblinking. Finally, a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't acceptance, but it was a grudging respect. Clara had not bowed. She had held her ground with grace and intelligence. Meanwhile, back in New York, Brendan Holloway's world was not as perfect as it appeared. His marriage to Penelope was already showing signs of strain. Penelope was a brilliant social asset, but she was also incredibly expensive and demanding. Their life was a constant performance for the press, and the pressure was mounting. More worryingly, Brendan's tech company, Holloway Innovations, was facing a government investigation over alleged data privacy violations. The stock was plummeting, and his carefully curated image as a visionary genius was beginning to tarnish. The news of Clara's relationship with a prince hit him like a physical shock. He saw the paparazzi photos online and felt a bizarre, possessive rage. His quiet, unassuming Clara with a prince. It didn't compute. He'd told everyone she was a nobody. Nobodies didn't end up with royalty. His immediate reaction was denial, followed by a burning need to reassert his dominance. He had one of his assistants do a deep dive on Prince Alistair and Eldoria. What he found only stoked his fury. The Eldorian royal family's wealth was ancient, private, and dwarfed his own new money. They had a level of prestige and power that he could only dream of. His ex-wife hadn't just moved on. She had ascended to a stratosphere he couldn't touch. It made his own upgrade to Penelope, the senator's daughter, feel suddenly second-rate. The humiliation he had inflicted on Clara at his wedding now felt like a terrible miscalculation. He had created a narrative where she was the failure. Her new reality threatened to unravel that story, and in doing so, expose him as the fool. He became obsessed, checking news sites for updates on her, a bitter envy coiling in his gut. He needed to see her. He needed to confront this new reality and somehow bend it back to his will. His chance, he soon discovered, was coming. The Eldorian Royal Foundation was the primary sponsor of the upcoming Metropolitan Art Gala in New York, one of the biggest social events of the year, and its new patrons, Prince Alistair and his official fiancée, Clara Abernathy, would be the guests of honor. The Metropolitan Art Gala was the apex of the New York social scene, a glittering spectacle of power, wealth, and couture. For Brendan and Penelope, it was the most important night of the year, a chance to network, to be seen, and to project an image of untouchable success, especially now that his company was weathering a storm of bad press. Brendan needed a win. He needed to look like the king of his world. He felt a nervous energy crackling in his veins as he adjusted his Tom Ford tuxedo in the back of the town car. Penelope, beside him in a shimmering, barely there silver gown, was scrolling through her phone, critiquing the early arrivals on a gossip blog. "Oh, look, the Vanderbilts are here," she sniffed. "Her dress is last season." Brendan wasn't listening. He was scanning the same sites, But he was only looking for one thing, a glimpse of Clara. He had seen the official announcement of their engagement a month prior, a simple, elegant statement from the Eldorian royal palace. It included a stunning portrait of Clara, her face glowing with a confidence he'd never seen before, a sapphire on her finger that made Penelope's massive diamond look gaudy. The announcement had also mentioned her formal acceptance into a prestigious doctoral program, with her research sponsored by the Royal Foundation. It was a public validation of everything he had once dismissed. His stomach clenched. He had told himself and everyone else that she was a nobody, but the world was now calling her Her Serene Highness, the future princess of Eldoria. As they stepped onto the red carpet, the flashbulbs were blinding. The reporters shouted their names. Brendan put on his practiced, confident smile, his arm firmly around Penelope's waist. They were a power couple. He repeated the phrase to himself like a mantra. Inside the gala was a dizzying swirl of champagne orchestral music and the low roar of 1,000 conversations. Brendan schmoozed and smiled, but his eyes kept darting towards the grand staircase, where the guests of honor were scheduled to make their entrance. And then a hush fell over the hall. An announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our honored guests from the Principality of Eldoria, His Serene Highness, Prince Alistair, and his fiancée, Ms. Clara Abernathy." Every head turned. Clara appeared at the top of the stairs, and the sight of her stole the air from Brendan's lungs. She was not the quiet, mousy woman he remembered, the one who would shrink in his shadow. The woman on the staircase was luminous. She wore a deep emerald green gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, her shoulders bare, her posture poised and regal. Her hair was swept up, showcasing a simple but elegant diamond necklace. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was radiant with a self-possession that was utterly captivating. She looked like she belonged there. Beside her, Prince Alistair was the very picture of quiet dignity, his eyes fixed on Clara with an expression of pure adoration. They descended the stairs, not like celebrities seeking attention, but with the calm grace of people who were completely secure in their world. Brendan felt a hot, prickling wave of something he hadn't felt in years: inadequacy. He watched as the most powerful people in the room, EU senators, cultural icons, parted to let them pass their heads, nodding in deference. Penelope, sensing the shift in the room's gravity, whispered, "My God, is that your ex-wife?" Her voice was sharp with disbelief and a note of insecurity. "It is," Brendan managed to say, his throat tight. He had to get to her. The compulsion was overwhelming. He excused himself from a conversation with a tech billionaire and began to move through the crowd, Penelope trailing anxiously behind him. He felt like a shark moving toward its prey, but for the first time he wasn't sure who was the predator and who was the prey. He intercepted them, near a towering floral arrangement. "Clara," he said, his voice coming out louder and harsher than he intended. Clara and Alistair stopped. She turned, and her eyes met his. There was no flicker of pain, no fear, no lingering hurt. There was just a cool, polite blankness. It was the look one gives a stranger who has mistaken you for someone else. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Have we met?" The question hung in the air between them, a perfect, devastating blow. For a moment, Brendan was speechless. She was pretending not to know him. Him, Brendan Holloway, the man who had built her and then broken her. "Clara, it's me, Brendan," he stammered, a flush creeping up his neck. A few people nearby had turned to watch, their curiosity piqued. "Ah, yes, Brendan," she said, her expression changing to one of faint, distant recognition, like someone trying to recall a minor character from a long-forgotten play. "Holloway, of course. How are you?" It was a masterstroke of dismissal. She had stripped him of all his power, of their entire shared history, with a few simple words. Prince Alistair stood silently by her side, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone was a statement. He looked at Brendan with an air of mild, regal indifference, as if observing an insect. Brendan, floundering, felt his arrogance reassert itself as a defense mechanism. "I see you've done well for yourself," he said, gesturing vaguely at Alistair. "I have to say I'm impressed. I never took you for such an ambitious climber." The insult was clumsy, desperate. Penelope, standing beside him, winced. Clara didn't even flinch. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "You're mistaken, Brendan. Ambition is about wanting more than you have. I was never ambitious in that way. I simply learned to value what I already possessed." Her eyes met his, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something other than indifference. It was pity. "My work, my passion, my self-respect. Things you never understood. Things it seems you still don't." She then turned to Penelope, extending a hand with effortless grace. "You must be Penelope. It's a pleasure to meet you. Your dress is lovely." Penelope, flustered by the genuine kindness, shook her hand mutely. In that moment, the comparison was brutal. Penelope, in her flashy, revealing gown, looked like a pretender next to Clara's timeless elegance. "Well," Brendan blustered, trying to regain control, "my life, as you can see, has moved on to bigger and better things." He gestured at Penelope at the gala, at his whole world. Alistair chose that moment to speak, his voice low and cutting. "Indeed," he said, his gaze sweeping over Brendan with icy disdain. "I've read about your company's recent troubles with data privacy, a fascinating business model, selling the very soul of your clients." He paused, then delivered the final fatal strike. "Her Serene Highness and I must be going. The director of the Met is waiting for us. Do try to enjoy what's left of your evening." He called her Her Serene Highness, not Clara, not my fiancé. He used her full future title, cementing her status, and in the same breath erasing Brendan completely. With a final polite nod, Alistair guided Clara away. The crowd parted for them, then closed back in, leaving Brendan and Penelope standing alone in their wake. The whispers started instantly. The sympathetic looks were gone, replaced by smirks and poorly concealed amusement. He had tried to humiliate the nobody, and had instead been publicly dismantled by a prince and his future princess. Brendan stood frozen, the champagne in his hand tasting sour. He looked at his wife, whose face was a mask of fury and embarrassment. He looked around the room at the powerful people now ignoring him. He had built his world on the perception of power. In the space of 2 minutes, Clara, the woman he had branded a nobody, had shown everyone that his power was an illusion. She hadn't screamed or cried or sought revenge. She had simply outgrown him. And in doing so, she had left him behind, a ghost at a feast that was no longer his. The ride back to their penthouse was a silent, suffocating affair. The glittering lights of Manhattan blurred past the tinted windows of the Maybach, each one a pinprick in the thick blanket of tension inside the car. Brendan stared straight ahead, his jaw so tight it ached. He could still see the pity in Clara's eyes. It was worse than hatred, worse than anger. Pity was a judgment. It implied he was something small, something broken. Penelope sat rigidly on her side of the plush leather seat, her silver dress seeming to radiate a cold fury. She hadn't said a word since they'd made their hasty, humiliating exit from the gala. Her silence was more damning than any tirade. He was a man who controlled narratives, who bent reality to his will. Tonight, his own ex-wife had rewritten his story in front of the entire world, and he had been rendered utterly powerless. The moment the penthouse door clicked shut behind them, Penelope's control snapped. "A nobody," she hissed, whirling on him. She ripped the diamond earrings from her lobes and threw them onto a marble console table, where they skittered with a series of sharp clicks. "You told me she was a nobody, a sweet, unambitious little thing you left behind. That woman was not a nobody, Brendan. That woman, that woman made me look like a fool. Don't be ridiculous, he snapped, his voice rough. She got lucky. She latched onto some European relic with a title. Oh, stop it! Penelope's voice rose, laced with venom. You're the one who looks ridiculous. Did you see the way people looked at you at us? You didn't just get snubbed, you got erased. She looked at you like you were a piece of gum on her shoe. And her fiancé, the prince, he looked at you like you were something he was about to have scraped off. Every word was a nail in the coffin of his pride. He had married Penelope for her connections, for the image of power she projected. But in the face of true inherited prestige, her sharp-edged, new money glamour had looked cheap. And in her eyes, he was now the one who had cheapened her brand. My father will be hearing about this, she continued, her voice dropping to a dangerously low level. He's been fielding calls all week about your company's ethical lapses. He was counting on tonight to smooth things over to project stability. Instead, you got into a public spat with your ex and a future head of state. You've made yourself a liability. That was the word that sealed it. Liability. It was the same cold corporate term he had used in his mind when he decided to divorce Clara. The foundation of his marriage to Penelope wasn't love. It was a merger, and he had just sent the stock plummeting. The weeks that followed were a slow-motion unraveling. The gala incident became the talk of the town, a juicy morsel of gossip that was reported with thinly veiled glee in every society column and financial blog. The story was always framed the same way, the arrogant tech mogul getting his public comeuppance. The narrative he had so carefully crafted of the brilliant visionary who had outgrown his simple first wife was shattered. The new narrative was far more compelling, the fool who threw away a diamond and was left holding glass. The bad press was like blood in the water for the sharks circling his company. Investors grew more skittish. The federal investigation intensified. His father-in-law, Senator Davies, who had once been his staunchest public defender, was now conspicuously silent. The political shield he had paid for with a wedding ring had been withdrawn. His marriage to Penelope disintegrated into a series of bitter transactional arguments held in hushed tones over breakfasts they didn't eat. It ended as it had begun, like a business deal gone sour. Her lawyers contacted his, and the divorce was even more brutal and public than his first one had been quiet and swift. Penelope, the ultimate social survivor, was determined to cut her losses and ensure everyone knew she was the wronged party escaping a failing enterprise. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Clara was navigating a different kind of aftermath. As she and Alistair were driven away from the gala, she leaned her head against his shoulder, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly seeping away, leaving a strange, quiet calm. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his hand covering hers. "I think so," she breathed. It felt final, like closing a book I didn't even realize was still open. She looked at him, her eyes clear and steady. "Thank you for standing with me, for calling me Her Serene Highness." Alistair smiled, a warmth that reached his eyes. "I was merely stating a fact and reminding a fool of what he lost." He grew more serious. "My mother will be pleased. She values grace under pressure above all else. Tonight you showed the world you are more than capable of handling yourself. You showed them you are a queen." He was right. The incident at the gala, contrary to what one might expect, solidified Clara's position within the royal ecosystem. Queen Beatrix, who had viewed Clara with cautious skepticism, now saw her as a strategic asset. She had faced down a hostile ghost from her past with a poise that protocol couldn't teach. She had defended the family's honor without raising her voice. It was a masterclass in royal power dynamics, and the Queen was deeply impressed. A year later, the world looked very different. Brendan Holloway had been forced to step down as CEO of his own company amidst the scandal and a disastrous settlement. His divorce had cost him a significant portion of his fortune. He was still a rich man, but his influence had vanished. He was a social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at the galas he was no longer invited to. On a bright autumn afternoon in Eldoria, Her Serene Highness Princess Clara was standing in the newly dedicated West Wing of the Royal Library. It had been her first major project, the creation of a state-of-the-art conservation and digitization center, making the priceless Eldorian archives accessible to scholars around the world. Dressed in a simple but elegant pantsuit, she was explaining the intricacies of restoring medieval inks to a group of visiting university students, her face alive with passion. She was in her element, not as a silent accessory, but as a driving force. She had woven her own identity into the fabric of her new life, creating a role that was uniquely hers, a blend of royal duty and academic passion. Later that day, Alistair found her in her private study, a beautiful room with arched windows overlooking the palace gardens. She was bent over a 15th century manuscript, the very same Book of Hours from Florence, now fully restored to its breathtaking glory. It was the centerpiece of the new collection. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Still hiding away with your dusty pages?" he murmured, his voice filled with affection. Clara leaned back against him, a contented smile on her face. "Some things never change," she said softly. She looked from the illuminated manuscript, a treasure she had saved from oblivion, to the view of the gardens beyond a future that was bright and full of promise. She had once lived in a world where she was told her passions made her a nobody. Now she lived in a world where those same passions helped her command a room, inspire others, and preserve history. She hadn't needed a prince to save her, but finding one who truly saw her, was the most beautiful chapter in the story she had written for herself. In the end, Clara's story isn't about marrying a prince. It's about a woman who was told she was a placeholder in someone else's life and decided to become the main character in her own. Her triumph wasn't the moment she walked into the gala with royalty on her arm. It was in the quiet, determined hours she spent in that dusty Florentine studio, painstakingly reclaiming her passion and her sense of self, piece by piece. The prince wasn't the prize. He was the wonderful consequence of her own journey to self-worth. Brendan tried to define her by her relationship with him, but Clara found her true power in defining herself by her own merits. Her story is a powerful reminder that the most dazzling glow-up has nothing to do with external validation, and everything to do with the quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from truly knowing your own value. If Clara's journey of resilience and self-discovery inspired you, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story of triumph and transformation. And we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. What part of Clara's story resonated with you the most? Thank you for watching.